So in the last video, we covered Zoom and what a popular tool it's become, especially during this time and everyone working from home and people trying to communicate together, which is great. But the thing is, with an increase of popularity comes an increased risk of hacking, unfortunately. So in this video, we're going to cover how to secure your Zoom account and make sure that your meetings are safe and you're keeping hackers out. All right, so let's jump right in. First off, I want to share a couple articles with you and headlines. If you haven't heard already, Zoom being the biggest target, but just teleconferencing in general. There's a new term coming in that I just heard for the first time, Zoom bombing. I've had a couple of friends and colleagues in the industry send me some articles saying, hey, have you heard about this? But basically, the FBI has come out and let us know that, hey, there are groups of hackers taking advantage of everybody jumping on Zoom during this coronavirus crisis, and they are hijacking, for lack of a better term, ongoing Zoom meetings and will just display profanities or yell out profanities, display inappropriate things on share screens. And this could be maybe someone in a classroom setting. Apparently, they've had this happen in Massachusetts or corporate environments. All of a sudden, you're having a meeting and somebody else is able to join in and basically take over the meeting and share their screen. And so obviously not good, right? Not something you want to experience, especially if you're in a classroom setting, you get someone doing something inappropriate. So I definitely want to, number one, let you know about this. And number two, let's take a look at some built-in settings that Zoom already has where you can really increase the security and make sure you're not going to get Zoom bombing. Another quick article I want to show, and then we'll jump into the settings, is today the CEO announced of Zoom. He's coming out publicly because, of course, they're getting a lot of information about them coming out. Look at this headline, though, or part of the sub-headline. Zoom has skyrocketed to 200 million daily users. Then that's for March. They're averaging 200 million people a day are using Zoom. Their average before in December was 10 million. So, again, unfortunate for them. It's a good thing, right? People are using them. But whenever you have a huge influx of users, you're going to become a bigger target for hacking. So he's announced that they're freezing any feature upgrades in the next 90 days. They're going to focus solely on security, which is a good thing. They're taking it serious because there are some vulnerabilities and concerns over encryption. So again, I'll share these articles in the description. Read them for yourself. If you are a company that's using this and you've got HIPAA information you may be sharing back and forth, you may want to read this. But I think for your average user, the settings we're going to go over can definitely increase the security. So let's go ahead and jump there. So I'm going to go ahead and navigate here to the web portal. So I'm logged into my Zoom account. This should look familiar if you have one. Now mine is a paid account, so you'll see things like the webinar tabs, but for the most part, it should look very similar. So log into your Zoom account. I recommend go ahead and do that while this video is playing. So I'll kind of go at a slower pace. And let's go over some of the settings, right? So once you get into your Zoom page, we're going to navigate to the settings tab here on the left. And there are three different areas. There's the recording, telephone, and meeting. We're going to focus on meeting here on this video and implement some features that are not turned on necessarily by default that can help with security, right? So we'll go down real quick. I won't go through each one of these, but there's obviously some other features that you could set if you wanted to, like making sure your videos by default on host, participant videos, but I just leave all those by default. It's nice to just be able to have the ability to turn those on. You want to make sure that this is not enabled, and it shouldn't be, but allow participants to join the meeting before the host arrive, right? This kind of relates to security. You want to be the first person to join the webinar, and as we'll talk about, then let the appropriate people in, right? Also, make sure this is selected, that this is on. Require a password when scheduling new meetings. The reason this is important is if you send out your meeting links, number one, you don't want to make your invite links to a meeting public, right? Don't just post it on a website. Make sure you're keeping that private. You're sending it to the invites or the people you want to invite by email. But also you want to require a password that they only have. Just in case someone is able to get a hold of that unique meeting link, they're going to need the password to log in as well. So that's a good first layer. We have that set on here by default here in these settings pages. Again, some of these settings you can choose as you create the meeting, which I'll show you. But coming here into your settings, where we're at right now, will make it default anytime you create a meeting. So that's important to note. Let's go ahead and go down. Again, I'm not going to go over each one of these. I'm going to go on more of the ones that have to relate to security, but there's a lot of different features you could do here by default. If you have meetings where you want your meeting to all be encrypted, perhaps you're in the healthcare industry and you're having a meeting that contains some very sensitive information, you can go ahead and turn this encryption on as well. And that basically means that all the data that is saved, if you're doing recordings, for example, they're encrypted. They're not even Zoom can access it. Nobody can access it. Something to look into. Let's go ahead and scroll down to, I'm going to go down to screen sharing that's on. So again, you can decide who can do screen sharing. Are you going to make it available to all participants or the host only, right? Who can start sharing when someone else is sharing, and we're going to do that to the host. If you want to be extra secure, you can maybe make it to where only the host can share their screen, right? I like to do all participants. We know who's in our meeting. I'll show you some other things we do down below so we know exactly who's in our meeting, but you can choose that as well. Let's go ahead and scroll down here. Virtual background, that's going to be on by default. We talked about that in the last video, how to do that. Waiting room. So besides having a password, having a waiting room is a really good idea. Basically, think of the waiting room as exactly what you'd see if someone was walking into your office, right? Before they get to the conference room where the meeting's going to be, perhaps they're going to sit down in the lobby, and then you or the receptionist will escort them into the conference room, right? Well, it's the same thing with Zoom. You can actually create this waiting room, and by default, this will be turned off in most cases from what I've seen. So you want to come down, settings, waiting room, and turn that on. And what that's going to do, and I'll show you an example. I'm going to do a fake meeting here. You will be able to decide if that person in the waiting room is someone you recognize and let them into the meeting, right? So choose a participant to place in the waiting room. Again, all participants and guest participants only. This would mean if you have an internal meeting and anyone who has a Zoom account within your company, or if they have the same email address that's your company's email address, if you choose guest participants only, then they will not need to go into the waiting room. I like to make it all participants, especially if it's not too large of a meeting, and you can manually let them in. Right now, with everything going on, I would just suggest doing that to be safer. You can also customize what the waiting room looks like. So we have a little logo on ours. By default, it'll say this message, please wait, the meeting host will let you in soon. But you can customize that to your liking so people can see or have this little message as they're waiting. And this is not necessarily security, but I talked a little bit about this last time. By default, this will be turned off. This is show a join from a browser link. I like this when I'm inviting especially clients or vendors, partners that are not internal, and maybe they haven't used Zoom before. I want to give them the option to just join the meeting directly from the browser without having to actually download Zoom and have it all installed. So that's a nice feature. I'll show you what that looks like too. And that's about it in terms of security. Then there's notifications. But again, I don't want to make this an hour-long video, so I'm just going over the security features. So again, if you haven't gone through it yet, log into your account, come into settings. You can even go into this little shortcut here, in meeting, advanced, and you will see, if you scroll down a little further, the waiting room. So two most important, create a password and have a waiting room. So let me go ahead and start a meeting here. Again, if we schedule a meeting, let me just show you this first too. If I go to schedule a meeting, you'll notice that now the required meeting password is on by default, right? But if I wanted to, for this particular meeting, to turn that off, I could. And the same thing with my meeting options. You'll notice now that enable waiting room is checked by default. But again, if for this particular meeting, if I want to change any settings, I can do that. So I can maybe take that off if I didn't want it anymore. Or I can say, you know what, mute all participants when they come in. I can have that sort of control. So in this case, I'm just going to do a meeting right off the bat here. So let me go ahead and start with the video on. You see that real quick? Down below, I can either open my Zoom meeting or there's a message to say start from browser. That's because I selected that option. So for your participants that are joining, especially if you know that there's some that maybe have not used Zoom before, it's a nice feature to add. So it just decreases the chance of them having an issue downloading and opening Zoom. But I'm going to go and open it now. Let's let that connect. All right, I'll join here. Just turn the video off so I'm not too distracting here. Okay, so I'm in my meeting, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and join this meeting. Let me go ahead and invite myself here. Okay, so what I did is I just invited John Doe, right, to this meeting, sent him the meeting invite, had the meeting ID, and it had that password, so he had to go ahead and put the password. And now that I'm in the meeting, and this would do the same thing for many people that came, I'm getting a message that John Doe has entered the waiting room. So he's still not in the meeting. John Doe does not have any access to see my screen. He's not hearing any of the audio at this point, but I see that someone popped in. So I can go ahead and click admit here, or if I just click my manage participants panel right here, I will see that there's somebody waiting. So if I had invited 5, 6, 10 people, 50 people, I would see them all in here, and I can now select admit. So once I click admit John Doe, he is now in the meeting, and he's going to go ahead and join his audio, and looks like we're done. So John is now in the meeting. He can see my screen. He can hear me. We can hear him if John Doe is in fact a real person, of course. Now, you'll notice if I hover over John again, I have controls, either here in this window or here in my participant window. So let's just say, for example, that I didn't want John in here anymore. I can put him back in the waiting room, right? Or I can bring him back in. So it's kind of nice to practice with those controls, because if for some weird reason you had someone join that shouldn't be there, you can put them back in the waiting room, or you can simply even click remove, and it will remove them from the meeting altogether, right? They'll just be kicked out. So a really nice feature. Again, John Doe had to have that password I gave him, and before he even got into my meeting, he was placed in the meeting room. So 2 very useful features that will help you avoid being Zoom bombed, or have a Zoom bombing or hijack, whatever term they're using now for it. Easy to set up. Just go to your settings, turn on the passwords, turn on the waiting room, and you'll be good. So hopefully that helps. I hope you got some good tips out of this. Hopefully you're able to follow along and get those settings set up for your own Zoom meetings, and avoid being in the next article with somebody hijacking your meeting. Thanks again for watching. We'll catch you on the next video.